Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on all matters property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every Sunday from 10 a.m. on YouTube, Facebook, and on our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. And if you're watching on our website, we'd love you to leave us one of those Google reviews. Just hit the button on the homepage and leave us a short review. Please get involved by adding your comments in the comments section. If you'd like to email us, it's hello@propertymatters.co.uk. Property Matters is also available as a podcast on our website via the biggest podcast platforms also every Monday from 10 a.m. We have a special guest with us this week. We're delighted to welcome our usual property expert, of course, Joe Joshi, and our residential lettings and sales expert, Kam Kalra. So, gentlemen, welcome.
Yes, welcome. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for that lovely, kind introduction, and welcome back to Kam. We're going to call it the Kam Kalra Show. I think it's got a ring to it now. Kam is, of course, our expert who's been enjoying the Outer Hebrides, the Bahamas, London, Paris, New York, all over the world, traveling, and we finally managed to put a hook on him and say, look, come and join us back and tell us what's happening in the letting world. And that's where Kam will be actually supporting and helping us. And so welcome back, Kam, and I hope you're not leaving very soon again to do your globetrotting.
Yeah, that's
Thank
true,
you.
actually.
Thank you very much.
That was true, Carl, because the last time you were on the show, you went off to India for ages.
That's so true. No, thank you. I'm back now, and it's amazing to be back. Thank you for inviting me for the show. As always, it's amazing to talk to Mr. Joshi for his expert advice on auctions, and lovely host Paul Allen. No, thank you very much.
It's great to have you with us again. And just before we get into our three specific stories, as we normally do, and we'd love to get your expertise on these, and we've got a lettings and landlords focus on the show for you, obviously, today. But you're with Ellis & Co., the sales and lettings company. You've been with them for a long, long time, ellisandco.co.uk. Just tell us a little bit about the business, and in particular, I'm interested to find out, obviously, agents and lettings agents have had a great time over the last couple of years. Things have been very, very rosy, but we're all buttoning down the hatches for the next couple of years because it's going to be pretty tough, I hear.
Yes, I believe everything has got its own ups and downs, and looks like the lettings industry has been hit by a lot of interesting legislation, so-called, from the beautiful government, looks like it now. A lot of legislations which has been in favor of the landlord and tenants is becoming quite questionable, especially to do with the interest rates. As we all know, it's not very easy for landlords to manage. The property prices are getting affected a lot. The rental prices are going high, which is becoming practically impossible for tenants and landlords to manage and try and come up with a balance whereby landlords can try to organize continuing with their property while they hold on to the investment, and tenants can work out a very reasonable kind of rental payment on a monthly basis. This is exactly what we are facing in the current difficult world, whereby landlords are finding it very, very difficult to manage their expenses, which is ultimately resulting in hiking up the rental prices.
For sure, and that's really where our stories start this week, Kam and Joe, because landlords set to pass on mortgage rate hikes to tenants. A high number of buy-to-let landlords, says this article this week, will be passing on higher mortgage payment borrowings, and the costs of that are going on to the tenants, so says new research. The cost of remortgaging has soared in recent months, of course, with many landlords looking at the rates starting from around 5%, leaving them with little alternative to increase rates to satisfy the lender's mortgage borrowing conditions, and also to ensure that they're able to afford the monthly repayments. According to the latest Landbay quarterly survey, almost 7 in 10, 68% of landlords plan to raise rents if their mortgage rate goes up when they come to remortgage. The coming 12 months, 44% of landlords say that they expect to increase rent by 6 to 10% if their mortgage rate increases. Of those who intend to raise rents, 70% will do so for both new and existing tenants. whilst 19% of respondents were still unsure about their plans, 13% said no to any increases, just 13%. The main reasons against strong rental yields and also, of course, keeping hold of good long-standing tenants. And there's the issue for the landlords, isn't it, really, Cam? Because you've got a good tenant in your property and you're getting a reasonable yield. You don't want to upset the apple cart and lose them and maybe end up with a problem tenant. So what do you do? Do you just swallow the cost, or how are your landlords seeing it?
That's exactly the challenge that we all are facing as agents and also as landlords, which has become a most talking point in the current day and age, really. Government is definitely not making it easy for the landlord to continue with their investment portfolio or renting their property out with the current rental investment, what they are achieving. The increase in mortgage rate doesn't really help the landlord in any way, because if they have to pay higher rate every given month, how would they normally manage up to their expenses, really? I mean, the main question here is to understand, if the rent are not going to be increased, what will happen to the void which the landlord is going to face going forward? The mortgage companies will continue to increase the monthly payment for the landlord, which is what is becoming very, very challenging. In my understanding, it is paramount for the government to step in now and try and make it slightly easier for the landlord in one way or the other. I mean, how they can do it, what they can do it, they are the ones who come up with the option of increasing the mortgage rate. They are the ones to come up with the option of increasing the tax liability for the landlord. There are a lot of changes that has happened in the last couple of years, which has gone negative towards the landlord, and now landlords are stuck with a position where how they manage their expenses and how they can continue renting their property to the tenants without hiking up the rental rates is what is becoming very, very challenging for every single person. What can landlord really do? I mean, majority of the landlord have no financial incentive or benefit to evict tenants without a good reason. If they don't go for a rental increase, then what will happen to the void that they're going to accumulate over a period of time? Ultimately, they will have to make a decision where they want to keep the property with taking negative equity going forward, or increase the rent and put tenants at risk, whereby the income is not going up on a monthly basis. On an average, we have noticed that tenants would have to pay, give or take, £200-300 more a month to match up with the current mortgage interest rates, increase in interest rates. And £200-300 a month is not really a normal increase that we have ever come across in the last 10 years, which I'm very sure all of you guys will agree. And this is what the biggest challenge every landlord is facing as to what to do at this stage, whereby a government intervention is very, very much needed.
Yes, it's interesting that research from BVA BDRC, which was done for the National Residential Landlords Association, they say that 63% of landlords that have buy-to-let mortgages on at least one property, of this group, 29% plan to remortgage at least one property over the next year. And the Bank of England estimates that by the end of next year, monthly repayments for buy-to-let landlords are expected to rise by exactly the figure you said, 175. It also warned that a fifth of landlords with such a mortgage will face increases of over £300 per month. So, Joe, what are you hearing from landlords, and what are you suggesting to fellow landlords that they should do in these circumstances? Because it's far hard to swallow another £300 a month.
Well, it's not just the £300 a month that they're having to sort of take on board. It's also all the utility costs that have gone up as well. But the first thing here is about the mortgage rate and the fact that they've got to, the landlords are in a real cross fire situation. They want to keep the tenants, but of course what they don't want to do is actually end up almost paying for the privilege of keeping the tenants, because as the rates have gone up, they are now having to pay that. And it's causing a huge problem. Of course, the next part is going to be evicting them. And on what grounds does somebody get evicted, and where do they go if they are going to get evicted? It's back to the council for perhaps getting rehoused, and the council what they don't realise is actually reliant on these small landlords in the first place to provide the accommodation that they need for the families that are actually on their list. So it's a bit of a vicious circle. The question is really, what can the government do? Well, the answer is the government aren't going to do anything, because they have, over the last, 3 or 4 years now with the pandemic, only but, thrown money at all the people. And they've just come to a point where they're just saying, we just don't have the money to be able to offer you this or offer you that. Even now, if you look at all the strikes that have been going on, they've gone on longer than you think, and not one really has been settled on the basis that they've managed to make an agreement out of it. So, we are in a very, very precarious situation at this moment in time, when you've got this scenario going on where the government can't offer anything. And of course, the banks, Bank of England and all lenders are pushing their rates up. And the tenant, because obviously, they are the end game, are now in a position where they've got to pay more money. But if they're not earning enough, it's not going to happen. So I don't see a very good solution right now here on that. And the reason for that is because the government's hands are tied. I mean, I know we go back to them and say, they've got to do something, but at the end of the day, they also can only do so much, and they did a lot at the pandemic. People had the benefit of that, and now we're paying the price for it. Now, I agree with Cam. Obviously, there are things that they've got to do, and the rates were really low earlier on, and they are now at such a level that it's become unattainable. But even if they were to kick a tenant out, and then want to sell their property, on the sales side of things, it's not as if it's buoyant either, because to a large extent, those first-time buyers that are looking to get those mortgages are struggling to get the mortgages based on their incomes and based on their facilities and their means. So, yeah, I think we're just going to have to, sit tight is probably the only thing I can actually really see for the next 18 months, and let it sort of pan its way through. I don't think there is actually one single solution that comes to my mind, Paul.
Yeah, because it's not exactly the case that even if you sat there taking a sort of negative equity on your rent every month based against your costs, you could at least in the old days you could have said, well, at least the value of the property is going up. But of course, the property prices, having boomed in recent months in the last couple of years, are now starting to ease off. So you can't even say that you've got that additional benefit. But Cam, I suppose the point that many people would make is, well, the rest of us have had shocking increases when we've had to remortgage on our mortgages. Why are renters any more special? They're just facing the same costs as everybody else, aren't they?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, there should not be disparity in anybody's income or payment as such, but there has to be some sort of limitation as to how much you can push the rental income, or how much you should be pushing the mortgage repayments for the landlord. Everyone has to have their balance of income. Eventually, if landlord is not able to afford paying the mortgage on a monthly basis, and if tenant is not able to afford that sort of increase, what do we do? There has to be some sort of solution. I totally agree and understand with Joe when he says that there is so much government can do. At the end of the day, yes, we can't expect everything, a government to move a magic wand and change everything overnight. But saying that, it is very, very important for the government to intervene at some point, because if this problem is not attended uh, immediately in the next 6 months to a year's time, this may lead to a massive housing crisis, is what we all can see. And we can see a lot of people are living on the streets. If people can't afford to pay the rent, and evictions will have to go through, a lot of tenants would have to go through evictions, and a lot of property may be repossessed. With the current legislation, the government has made it very, very difficult for investors to invest on a property, because there is no capital growth. Landlords cannot see any capital growth. They can't see a consistent rental income coming to their account. So what do? If the landlord is not looking to invest and offer their property in the market for rental purposes, how would tenants find properties to rent? I mean, ultimately, there has to be some sort of balance which needs to be proposed from the government side, is what I strongly feel. At the end, it is quite important in terms of rental income, which landlord is currently suffering, whereby we have noticed that a lot of tenants are not able to afford the rent. We are going through eviction in our own office currently, and we have applied for the a court notice in November 2022, and the next date of hearing we have received from the court is June 23. This goes on saying that even the courts are not able to cope up with the number of evictions that is currently going through with them. The landlord is suffering definitely because the rent is not being paid on time. This current particular landlord we are talking about is in arrears for almost, I believe, if I remember the figures correctly, £8,000 to £9,000. And for a normal landlord to be in such a big arrears and a government to expect to keep paying the mortgage on a timely manner is not going to be possible. So there has to be some sort of balance, in my understanding, whereby government may have to come up with a plan where to ease out the mortgage payments to the landlord if they have to continue increasing the rent or mortgage rates. Paul.
There's a massive headache here, Joe, isn't there? Because at the end of the day, the research says that landlords, 30% of landlords plan to cut the size of their portfolio in 2023. It's the highest level of planned disinvestment seen for more than 6 years. Just 9% said they were going to plan to increase their portfolio over the next 12 months. It's well known that we've already got a shortage of rental properties and a shortage of housing in general. This is just going to make a huge problem, as Kam was saying, for the government.
Yes, it is. But, I have to say that we can't continue to ask the government for a handout. That is right the way across the board. It is causing a problem. What you have to understand, it's a bit like running your own home pool. You've got a certain amount of income coming in, and you can only decide what you can spend on, what you can't. And the government is no different in that situation, in my mind. And yes, maybe they overspent at the pandemic, but if they hadn't done that in the pandemic, they would have been wrong, and that would have caused a problem. At the end of the day, they turn around and say, well, we want more money for ambulance workers and so forth and nurses. Yes, they deserve it, but it's only going to come from the taxes they're collecting. So if the taxes aren't being collected and we're not actually doing anything, it's just a vicious circle. So I hear everybody that the government has to do something. The only thing they can do probably is reduce the tax liabilities, but they increase the tax liabilities in order to collect the money to pay for the things in the first place. So we're not going to get anywhere very far in this whole situation. But the answer, as I said, in my mind at the moment, Paul, is really to park and stay still. Kicking people out of the flats doesn't work. I understand landlords are owed money. I think I've always said it. The answer, the communication is the answer to the problem, and everybody needs to have a conversation with each other and work out a deal that makes it work for all parties internally where possible. But there's no secret solution in this, and the problem is, and I've said this before on our show, but before Kam joined us, that is that we have had a double whammy, and that double whammy is what's caused this problem. It's the fact that we've had all the utilities. When you think that BP and Shell have just announced billions and billions worth of profit in a time, maybe they're the ones that need to come back to the table and say, you know what, we made all this money on the back of the fact that you guys are really having a tough time. We'll give some of this back to the government, which they can share out, and maybe we'll continue to go around. But they're not going to do that, are they, Paul? They're not. They're going to say, well, that's our money. We're not going to share that with you. So in the meantime, there's no actual solution that I can see that will make it work. All I can think is that, and I advise my clients that come to see me, is that you just got to work together with what you've got and stay with it. It will come back. We know that. That in the 40 odd years or 50 years or whatever we did the last calculation, Paul, we know that only 5 times have we had a sort of a reversal situation or a bad situation out of the 50 years that we've been in the property side of things. So, it is just one of those scenarios that we're going to have to work together. And I'm a fairly positive guy, but I can't see the solution. So the only solution is to stay put.
I have to say, there seems a simple solution, and that is the one that Nala is calling for, and also, interestingly, and get this name, the Cross-Party Levelling Up Housing and Community Select Committee. That's quite a mouthful.
Lovely.
Both of
Yeah.
them and Nala are both saying, look, it's very simple. All you need to do is just to review all these punitive tax measures you've put on landlords, ease them up a bit to make it a little bit more of an incentive, and then you'll have landlords staying in the sector and indeed investing in the sector, and you'll have more properties to rent. Surely that's a simple way. Yes, of course, they're not going to take as much tax, but surely, getting people into homes is got to be something that's really important. What's your view, Cam?
Absolutely, this is exactly what the government needs to step up their game and understand all the changes they have made recently in the last few years, which has been kind of more against the landlords of paying more taxes in all the fronts. It's not just about increasing mortgage rates; it's about paying more a tax on rental income. It's a lot of the landlords have been hit by on various fronts, which is what the main issue for the landlords are at this current moment in time. And this is what we are trying to understand as to how government can slightly balance and make it more favor in front of the landlord, really. If the landlord is being so harsh, they have to be, it has to be very, very understanding here that if the landlord would like to keep increasing the taxes and other bits and pieces for the landlord, if the government would increase all these taxes and percentages, mortgage percentages for the landlord, how would they expect landlords to come in and invest in properties if the small landlords are not investing in properties? The housing crisis will become bigger and bigger and bigger. The big landlords, okay, I understand a lot of big landlords may not have to face this kind of problem whereby they have a lot of alternative incomes apart from property income, whereby they can mix and match their potential of carrying on with the current property. But just if we try and take a step backwards and understand how many of small landlords will be affected by this tax increase, and how many of the small landlords will be affected by a mortgage rate increase. Small landlords I'm talking about who have got one or two properties, and those kind of properties and those kind of landlords is what we need to understand and try and make a bit more lucrative for them so they can keep coming into the market, buying those small one and two properties and keep offering it back to the market to say, yes, as a collective measure, this is what we have to offer to the market. And I believe I completely and totally agree with Joe Joshi here to understand that, yes, the government can only do so much, but at the same time, it's also very important to understand what do we do to protect these landlords from selling the property, because if they can't keep their rental income consistently coming in, and if the property is being sold on the market at a lower price, and there is always a negative equity at some point or the other, what could be done to keep these landlords going and carrying on with their expenses if they only have one or two property portfolios? And how can they assist the tenants who are defaulting on their mortgage? There has to be some sort of solution, which is what we have done in the past. Every time a big crisis comes up, some sort of solution has to be presented in the market from the government side, which is more balanced for the landlords and tenants. If a solution is proposed in the market, which is more balanced for tenants, or is more balanced for landlords, it's not going to work at this moment in time. It will be very, very difficult for anyone to carry on paying a high mortgage and expect low rent in return. And there has to be a proper balanced solution from the landlords to say, yes, this is what we are offering in the market to boost confidence of the landlords, offering a eviction on no-fault tenancies, a ban on no-fault tenancies, and changing the entire concept of tenancy agreement going forward. All of these little legislation will affect the landlord in a very big way, especially the small landlords. So it's very important to understand what would be the right course of action whereby an equal and balanced approach can be given to the landlords and tenants to come up with a kind of balanced ground, in my opinion, Paul.
It's interesting because our second story follows on from that, and it goes back to the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee report, which examined the government's proposed reforms on the rental sector and issued several recommendations. And the government now has 2 months to respond to this. So they were saying that abolishing of fixed-term tenancies and repealing Section 21 would undoubtedly give tenants greater security of tenure, but the proposed sales and possessions grounds could create a backdoor to no-fault evictions. But I just want to read you something in the text text, which gives a sense of how they view landlords versus tenants. So they said, we recognise that the majority of private landlords are responsible and have no desire for financial incentive to evict tenants without a good reason. And for those landlords, Section 21 feels like an indispensable means of evicting bad tenants. But the blight of unfair eviction and insecurity of tenure experienced by too many tenants today can only be remedied by its repeal. We remain concerned, however, that the proposed sales and occupation grounds, as currently designed, could be too easily exploited by bad landlords and become a backdoor to no-fault evictions. So the suggestion is that they recognise there are some good landlords, but they seem frustrated that there are so many bad ones and it's difficult to police them. It's almost like they're saying they don't want the small landlords because they're too much of a problem.
Yes, there is always pros and cons for everything, and no fault eviction ban has been on cards for quite a few years now. It comes back to the same question, even if there is a change in legislation whereby tenancy agreement, whereby the government is giving more security to the tenants to live in the property, with the increasing mortgage and with a not so sort of balanced rental income potential for the landlord, how would they manage to carry on paying the rent on a timely basis? And if the tenants are not paying the rent, eventually they will default, which will come back to the same question of a eviction on the basis of rental arrears. I mean, today, in a general scenario, how many landlords actually give notice on a no-fault tenancy? If you look at the percentage of the actual number of landlords giving notice to their tenants, it is very, very and extremely low. Landlords have absolutely no incentive to get the tenants out of the property, because it's not easy for any landlord to keep the property empty for especially if it's a buy to let, whether it's a small landlord or a big landlord. If the property is empty, it's not generating any income for the landlord. Why would a landlord would like to keep the property empty? And banning no fault eviction defies the purpose, in my opinion, and it's not solving any kind of question for the government or for the landlord in any shape or form. The fault. The major fault and major eviction question that we currently face is rental arrears, and that's the question which needs to be addressed by far the most, in my opinion. Banning a no-fault tenancy is not going to assist landlords or tenants in any way, because if a tenancy is going smooth, whereby landlord is getting rent on a timely manner, there is no problem. Most of the landlords would like to carry on these kind of tenancies for as long as they can. Maybe, yes, I'm not saying not all the landlords are same or not all the tenants are same. Sometimes landlords would have their own reasons to get the property back, but the percentage of those landlords are very, very low as compared to the bigger picture when you see in the market. I mean, if out of every 100 property or out of every 1,000 properties, you're talking about one or two properties giving notice on those grounds, and there are majority of the tenants are given notice on rent default section, then what is the main question here for the government to address for?
Yeah, Joe, you were going to comment on that. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, my thoughts on that really are, as I said earlier on, it's about what can be done, and what can the government do as an intervention. I mean, I was going to say to Cam, in his opinion, what if he was the chap who was asked to make a decision as to what would he do? What would you recommend to the government that would make your landlords stay in the game and perhaps keep the tenants? Now, on the Section 21 and the no-fault eviction situation, that I think is, it's such a small amount, but I think they're using a sledgehammer to sort of crack a nut, really, and is actually putting a lot of ordinary people into jeopardy. So that doesn't really make sense. And I've always been not happy with the abolition of the Section 21. What I've always said is that the Section 21 could have a slight amendment to it. There could be a Section 21A, which allows certain things to be, but not actually completely get rid of it, and then come up with something that means that the tenant is protected. The problem most landlords have at this moment in time, and the reason why they want to exit, is because the tenant has now got the upper hand in pretty much everything that they do. And so once they're in, it's a job and a half to get them out. And that's what's keeping people away from being in the business of buy to let, because they know that it's causing a huge problem. But I think that the government needs to sort of rethink about its Section 21 situation for starters, and it also needs to think about what they can offer, maybe even a short term over the next couple of years, some sort of tax break, so that it allows people to sort of get back on an even keel. Yes, I agree, something has to be done. I'm just, concerned that there's not much that they can do because they just don't have the money.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Sorry, Paul, you were saying something.
No, you go ahead.
Uh, Absolutely right. Joe has made some very interesting and valid points here by saying that what would government or what should government do to counteract this kind of problem? In my understanding, the most important step the government should do, if this question is asked to me, is to boost confidence of the landlords, boost confidence of the small landlords, or boost confidence of a medium scale landlords. I'm not talking about landlords who has got hundreds and thousands of properties, but I'm talking about landlords who have got like 5 to 10 properties. That percentage of landlords constitute the majority of UK as compared to a bigger landlords. A bigger landlord will only control certain percentage of the market, but the small landlords do control the majority of the market. And to boost their confidence by coming up with something favorable for them, and not coming up with very harsh legislation like abolishing Section 21, because these are very small things from government perspective, what they can think of. But at the end of the day, this is not assisting landlord and giving them confidence to invest in future. If a Section 21 is abolished, a new landlord will think 100 times before investing in a property. And this is what we are trying to understand, that what is the logical reasoning behind abolishing Section 21, because the number of eviction on the basis of Section 21 on a no-fault tenancy as it is does not constitute a bigger percentage in the UK. The fault evictions are the bigger ones, which is what we need to understand, how to counteract that problem and how a tenant can be assisted so the faults can be reduced. More to train the tenants in a lot of different ways, like if a tenant is facing some sort of problem in their personal life, yes, communication is amazing, I understand, but a deposit protection solution came in with the fact that a lot of agents were running away with the tenant's deposit, and a lot of landlords were running away with the tenant's deposit. So government has to step in to legalize the protection of deposit, and this is exactly what we are requesting and would like to highlight to the government, that if a tenant, it's not just the deposit tenants are worried about. There are a lot of other things that tenants are worried about. And it is time now whereby government can step in and come up with a lot of small scale help that they can offer, not financially necessarily. There's a lot of other helps that can be offered to the tenants to understand, yes, these are the problems we are facing, and this is a committee that has been formed, just like a deposit protection committee, to protect the deposit. This is the committee that has been formed, which will be run purely on the basis of landlords and tenants and not by a third party. And if a tenant has a problem, that can be addressed by that particular government, by that particular committee, just like the deposit is being governed by DPS. Paul.
It's interesting, isn't it, that the government put in the proposed sales and occupations grounds as an alternative to soften the blow of losing Section 21. But what they've now realised, I think, and what I'm reading between the lines with this particular report, is they suddenly thought, now with loads of landlords suddenly selling up properties, we don't want them evicting tenants on the basis that they're going to get rid of the property. So we want to make it hard for them to sell the property. So they're suggesting, for example, that the period that landlords that could use sales and occupations grounds for eviction should be doubled to a year, and the notice period served to tenants should rise from 2 to 4 months. The period landlords cannot market or re-let the property should rise from 3 months to 6 months after using the above ground. And in the case of sales grounds, encourage landlords to sell with sitting tenants. He added that fixed term tenancies should be retained for student housing and landlords in this space, and they should sign up to a government approved codes of conduct. So it's almost like, Joe, they found that, oh, hang on a minute, we've put this thing in here where we could have grounds to sell the property, so then we can just dump the tenant that way. And of course, with loads more landlords wanting to sell because it's just not making any financial sense anymore, they're trying to shut the back door that they created, aren't they?
Yes, because the long and the short of it is that they've caused themselves a huge issue by doing this. And if they allow landlords to evict these people quickly, those tenants are going to end up at the local government's offices and say, I'm homeless. And because they are the ones that are making it difficult to the landlords no longer want to give the properties to the local council, who have now got to find more homes for homeless people. As I said earlier on, it's a complete vicious circle, and somewhere something will have to give for the landlords to stay in the game. At the moment, it is not attractive. That's why corporate landlords are coming into this. You know, over the programs we've now covered, when corporates have decided to buy into what we call build to rent situation, because they would rather have a whole block that they can rent. But even those then become ghettos, and yes, they can get some sort of subsidy from the government. And maybe that's what's happening. Maybe the big guys are trying to push the little guys out, and by saying, yeah, it's just too expensive and too silly. But there's not enough new or big guys building or bringing them in. And if they are, they're not in the areas that people want to live. Yes, it's good to have a block of brand new 200 flats, perhaps in the middle of Birmingham. But if you're living in Southend-on-Sea, you don't particularly want to go to Birmingham. You know, you want to be within your family. There is a moral obligation for families and people to live within a distance. If they've got an elderly one, how can they look after them sitting in the other side? So there's a lot of uncertainty of what's actually going on in this. But what is for sure is made people stop and think about what they want to invest. And I've been an advocate throughout our time for making sure that people invest in property, because it is the best form of investment they can have. But at this precise moment in time, the government isn't assisting. It's not assisting because it's actually spent so much money elsewhere. And the problem is the system can be eased. Our levelling up chap, who seems to know everything about levelling up, but actually doesn't know anything about it because he hasn't actually got himself involved in any property or doesn't do any letting. He's just trying to tell everybody how to do it. And what I see is the government is now trying to tell everybody how to run their life. And, you know, that's okay if they feel that they can pay for it, but they can't. So they've got to accept that people have got to get on. Somebody may not want to keep a property rented out because they no longer can afford to pay for the tenant to live in the property because the mortgage rate's gone up. So they have the right to sell. They have the right to get themselves sorted out. And the government is what they're trying to do is saying, you don't have the right to do that because, you know, legislation says this guy's got to stay here. Why? Because they haven't got somewhere to put that person in the first place. So, you know, something has to give soon.
The report says the government would like landlords with smaller portfolios to leave the sector. The paper said that the only certainty was that the government does not know what it wants the private rented sector to do and what role it wants to play in the wider housing mix. And in particular, it's difficult not to suspect, given the changes in how the buy-to-let sector is taxed, that the government would like landlords with smaller portfolios to leave the sector because they're literally making it punitive for them. So we'll leave that point there, but I just then wanted to talk about the last point. And Cam, you touched on this earlier on. You talked about how long it's taking to go through the courts. The report also suggests that there should be, because of the volume of claims that are coming up, and this is before the abolition of Section 21. So the suggestion is that we should have a specialist housing court The report called for the establishment of a specialist housing court as the surest way of unblocking the housing court process. Well, you said something like 7 or 8 months one landlord was waiting, Cam. Do you think a specialist housing court's what's needed, or what's your thoughts?
Um, yes, that is certainly a very big concern for the landlords as to how they can protect their income when they are waiting for the court hearing date. If a tenant has not paid X number of months of rent, as it is, the landlord is panicking at a panic stage, and to make their ends meet is becoming very difficult. And waiting for the court order or waiting for the possession orders and to get the tenants evicted from the property just because the government has no house to give them does not mean that the landlord should be penalized. I mean, this is exactly what we are trying to understand as to how landlords can be ignored from the government point of view, especially bearing the fact that they are the one who provides, who would actually invest their own hard-earned money to provide housing to the market and to the tenants, and they are not doing much. The government is not doing much to protect their income. The housing court, coming back to your question, whether it's going to help or not, in my understanding, there has to be some sort of revolutionary change how protection of income can be offered to the landlord. Maybe instead of a housing court, insurance firm should be set up by the government, whereby by default every rent can be registered on an insurance portal which the tenant is paying, and that particular insurance company can guarantee the rental depending on what kind of tenancy is going in the property. And in case of default, the insurance company can provide some sort of support to the landlord and to the tenants at the same time. Court will be court at the end of the day if a separate court has been established, and if they are bombarded with number of evictions on arrears grounds, how would government propose to support those tenants who would be made homeless in the next 2 to 4 or maybe 6 months' time? So there has to be some sort of permanent solution as to why and how to protect these tenants from getting evicted, how a landlord's income can be protected. Is there an insurance product which is available in the market that can be used by the government, or can government come up with some sort of solution to protect landlords' income and advise on tenants? Could be the way forward, in my opinion, rather than forming a court which can be bombarded with number of eviction in future if these all terms are not met.
The report, Joe, is quite swathing in the way that it talks about the fact that the government doesn't really understand how undermining an unreformed court system could be, because you make all these new rules and new laws and then you can't even get in the court to have it proved or disproved. So they don't even realise that they need to reform the court system as much as they are the rules. And they also believe that the rules they're making are going to be difficult to prove in a court in the first place. So there's a lot of muddy water here and a lot of concern. And they're also suggesting that maybe a property ombudsman that's specifically for rented property and for landlords would be a first port of call before going to a court. What's your thoughts on that, Joe?
To be honest with you, you can have so many courts and so many property ombudsmen, and so it's just a bit of a job for the boys, to be honest with you, and that's just unnecessary cost and expense. I tend to go with Cam's thought that some sort of protection policy should be put in place, which would allow people at least the comfort of guaranteeing a rent when things fall out or fall in arrears. And so there are. I mean, I think some of the big companies like Direct Line are offering, after a certain period, you can actually insure against bad debt and that sort of stuff. And maybe that's what needs to be sort of put across the board, just generally to everybody, and not a specific situation. But this is not something that's going to go away in a hurry. It is a looming little time bomb that's waiting to be going off, and it's going to cause a lot of problems. And the problem is, where does the buck stop? It stops, unfortunately, at the footsteps and the doorsteps of the agents, because people are going to come back to us time and time again and say, this is a problem, this is a problem. And nobody wants to pay for that service. They want it all for love. Landlords obviously will tell you that they are now not making any money. So, the charitable trust of Ellis and Co. and Joe Joshi's Benevolent Fund will probably have to start to foot the bill for the carefully elected advice. And when that is given wrong, it'll be our fault in the first place that we didn't advise them correctly. So all I say is, going forward, be careful of the words that we choose, the people that we support. But the reality of it is that it's not going to go in a hurry. We'll be talking more and more about this in the coming weeks, I'm sure.
We will indeed. And on that note, I think we need to wrap up as we've gone past our allotted time. It's been a fascinating conversation. And thanks, Cam, for coming in and joining us today. We didn't even get to our third story, but we've run out of time. But so Ellis & Co. Sales and Lettings, ellisandco.co.uk, based in the Harrow office, I believe, Cam?
And Stanmore.
And Stanmore as well. So you can find them online at ellisandco.co.uk. Joe, Cam, thank you so much indeed for joining us for Property Matters. It's been a fascinating chat. I'm sure we'll come back to this topic in future weeks.
Thanks.